we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the video. Make sure you know when we get all or post our next videos. Hit that bell for the notifications. If you want to reach out to us, hit us up on our DMs. Hit us up on our Twitter at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast on Instagram. If you want to donate to the podcast, please hit us up on our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's a few different tiers there that you can use. And if you really like the podcast, wherever you're listening, please give us a 5-star review. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but it does mean a lot to us. And I'd love to welcome Miss Heidi Hoffman to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you, Mark?
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah.
So happy to have you in the studio too. I was just talking, we were kind of doing our little preamble before, and I was saying it's nice to kind of have people coming back to the studio finally, and it's a little bit on me too to kind of like work on my podcasting skills. And you have a podcast, right?
Sort of.
Right? Well, that was one of the things we were going to kind of talk about, right? So
yeah.
Tell everyone about your podcast.
Oh, great. Well, it's definitely not as official and established as yours. This is my inspiration here. But it's something that I wanted to start. It was a bit of a passion project for me, born out of, well, if you listen to the first episode, it says it was born out of radical change in my life, because I've been through quite a transitionary period over the last, year, but I mean, throughout adulthood as it goes, you know. Sure. And I started it the day I left for a 2-month trip to Costa Rica last year. And it wasn't just a trip for fun. It was meant to be, I guess, my version of Eat, Pray, Love, so to speak. Yeah. There was a lot leading up to this trip, so it wasn't just completely random. It was a place that I wanted to go to heal, to kind of, do some soul searching. Costa Rica itself is really well known for the whole Pura Vida idea, just enjoy life, just chill, just don't worry so much. And it absolutely lived up to that. It was phenomenal. So cool. But
so you were all over? Where exactly were you?
All over. So I started in San Jose, and I only booked my first 2 nights, so that, well, first of all, you have to, when you fly there, you have to tell the people at the airport where you're staying. Okay. Because I guess there's stuff that goes on, but they have to know that you're there, what your purposes are, that you're going somewhere, right?
That's fair.
Yeah, but beyond that, it was a hostel in the middle of the city. Beyond that, I didn't book a single thing, except for, okay, that's not entirely true. I had about 2 weeks unbooked that I wanted to just meet people at the hostel and travel around, and I did that, and it was fantastic. Cool. And then, so I went mid-October, and then at the end of October, I was going to be starting at an animal sanctuary. Cool. I lived on the animal sanctuary for a month, volunteering there, and that was just like, oh gosh, that was phenomenal. I got to hang out with sloths and all the birds, and had this little baby sloth that I love to take care of every day. She was so sweet. And monkeys and like ocelots, little cats, everything like that. It was so cool. And it was such a humbling experience, because I was also working full-time at the sanctuary, working full-time online with my full-time job at the same time. Totally. So it was a really good exercise in discipline and everything. So aside from that, I hadn't booked anything. I just traveled around, met people. Cool. We decided we're going halfway across the country. Let's do it. Let's go whitewater rafting. And it was so cool. It was incredible. Yeah.
I love whitewater rafting. I've only done it on the Ottawa River, but how was it? Like, were they major rapids?
It wasn't super major. Okay. Like, it was a good beginner river, but it was still intense enough. I can't remember what it was called, but it's one of the top 10 best water rafting rivers in the world, apparently. Whoa. It was absolutely gorgeous and like so much fun. I was laughing so hard the whole time, even when I went over the edge twice in the rapids. I was howling with laughter, falling over, and I was laughing so hard in the water that they couldn't pull me back in. And we're like in the middle of rapids, and they're like, "What's wrong with you? You're crazy." But it was so much fun, and it was liberating, and it was just, it's not rapids the whole time, right? Sure. It's rapids and then a calm area and then rapids. Cool. And about in the middle part, there was this calm area for, I'd say, like 500 meters, where we were in this canyon that had like waterfalls falling down and vines and up into the jungle sky, and we got to jump out and just float on our backs down this river. And it was just like, you know, I remember lying there just looking up at the sky and just like, thank you. Oh my God, what a phenomenal experience and beautiful day.
Sure.
And that was at the end of my month at the sanctuary too. So it was just kind of like a, you know, little
That's
cap.
so beautiful. I mean, I think that's the coolest thing with, I mean, travel is so special in so many ways, but when you get to go to a place that is like beautiful nature like that, I think that gratitude is so special when that feeling is there and you feel so much more connected. Because I mean, traveling and being connected with other people is super cool, but feeling that connection like with nature and like earth and like again, nature that way is so cool. I mean, like it's basically like Jurassic Park down there, right? Like,
you know how many jokes I had a taxi driver who picked me up from the airport the day I got there. His ringtone was the Jurassic Park theme song.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
But that's like, I'm pretty sure they even like shot most of the movies down there, right? But that's like that jungle, beautiful islands, so water, cool. Like everything basically, right? So cool. Like I think again, that, you know, where all the culture that came from there too, like, you know, even deeper into like South America, there's like, have you ever heard of the lost city of Z?
I've heard of it. Don't know anything.
So essentially it was for the longest time a theory that there was a city in the Amazon, and everyone was kind of like, no way, like it's always been jungle, like maybe there's like some ruins and stuff. But with like I think in the don't even quote me on this, but recently, like within the last 100 years, probably within the last 30 years, they used LiDAR technology, so like laser radar, and they were able to like map out this whole city in the Amazon jungle, like
a habitable city,
like it used to be.
Okay.
Like so, would have been. They said it was like probably like 8 million people. Like no kidding, like legit. And this would have been like during the probably like 1500s or like 17th, maybe 1600s. So like, you know, as there was like, you know, stuff happening in Europe and there was stuff happening in the Amazon, they just didn't know about it, right? Because it wasn't as connected. And then they think either disease or something came in and wiped the city out. And then it only takes like the jungle will overgrow things like in a couple years, legit, let alone like maybe like 20, 30 years. So they actually found this place. So I don't know if they've like done any excavations or anything or what they call it now, but there's like a book about it and all this stuff, The Lost City of Z. So I guess they didn't make a movie of it actually. I think Charlie Hunnam was in it. I think. Anyway, not World War Z.
Right.
Different.
No.
No zombies. The zombies, it doesn't stand for zombies. Although there might be zombies.
Oh shit.
Like Mayan zombies or something.
You never know, man.
Seriously. But that like seed of culture is very interesting, right? Because again, it's funny. I have this book over here by Graham Hancock. Have you ever heard about him? Mm-mm. He's like I think you just consider him an author, but he's really well read, really well like he puts together really strong arguments and like kind of meta-analysis of like anthropology stuff.
Love that.
I'm trying to put a broad point on it and just sounding dumb, but he has these theories of like ancient civilizations that we are kind of underestimating, like how old like human culture is. And that his research and this other guy named Randall Carlson, who's like a geologist, they have these theories that coincide that there was like a giant cataclysm that like wiped out a lot of human culture at one point, and we had to like kind of rebuild. So the theory is essentially something happened to the polar ice caps during our last ice age, and this is like in geological data, that all of a sudden we like sprang out of this ice age like really quickly. Like it was an ice age, and like within 100 years it was like normal period. And ice age essentially is just cold. Like I think it's like technically an ice age would be if we were in like 3 degrees cooler, average cooler temperature. It's not much to be in an ice age. Like this was like a more serious one, but again, the transition isn't a lot. It's only a few degrees transition, but it was enough that like the polar ice caps came down to like past where we are. And there would have been like a 2-mile ice shelf over Canada, more or less.
Holy crap.
crazy. And that would have been like over Russia, everywhere. So more or less any humans, if they did exist, they would have lived like right around the equator.
Right.
Where like all these ruins are, where all these old civilizations are. Something happened, a comet or something hit, and it flash melted the ice caps. And there was flooding, major flooding. And the only consistent myth that's in every like culture, tribe, like across the globe is that they have a flood myth. Like the Bible, like ancient Atlantis. Well, that's the thing. Here's a funny thing, because Plato talked about Atlantis, right? He's one of the first people to talk about Atlantis, and he actually gave a date of when it sunk.
Yeah.
And that works out to be about like 11,600 years ago, and that's when we came out of that ice age. So something must have happened, or something could have happened where like literally like tidal waves, like ridiculous, would have wiped out anything. Like even if that happened now, there would be like nothing left unless you live in like mountainous areas and like places that wouldn't have got flooded. And then they think that potentially anyone who did survive, like from this type, like, you know, if we're looking at like, you know, our world versus like, you know, like a tribal, like hunter-gatherer culture, anyone who survived from that, like higher civilization, went to these tribes to like rebuild civilization. And they were conceived as like gods because they had all this information and like all this stuff. And they're depicted in hieroglyphics and like craziness. And people are like, oh, they're aliens stuff. But it could have been just like other people with like other knowledge. And they depict them as like really big, which it's like kind of true. Like when I was in Thailand, people were like, everyone was short. Like it wasn't like, oh, it's just like average thing.
Yeah.
So like if you're coming into this anyway with all this knowledge, they're going to perceive you like, even if we went down to certain cultures with like a lighter, they'd be like, this is magic. So that's kind of where he's coming from. It's a little colonialist, but again, it's that idea that if there was like a major cataclysm, there's nothing to even prove it, like either than like geological stuff. So it's really interesting. And if that's true, our civilization's a lot older than we kind of give it credit for.
Yeah.
Right. And I think again, those ancient traditions and stuff that I'm sure you kind of came, like, were you like hanging out with the locals and stuff? Like, what did you get into as far as that, like getting to know the culture?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't as, like they have tribes that are more, I guess, close to their traditions in that sense. But where I was, it wasn't as, I don't know, it was, I don't want to say more civilized in a negative way, but it was more civilized.
I know what you mean.
And it's not a whole lot different from here. In some ways it is, for sure, but I'm sure there are definitely countries you can go to where it's more so that way. But, you know, it was a lot to do with food and music. I think the whole time I was there, I might have eaten meat maybe 2 or 3 times, and the rest of the time it's rice and beans every day and plantain, and it's delicious, and coconuts and so much fresh fruit, and you're always listening to the beautiful music on the beach at night under the full moon. Oh my gosh, I watched a giant green sea turtle, which is like 5 feet across, come out of the ocean under a full moon, dig her nest and lay her eggs. And I was like this far away from her. No way. Because once they start going, nothing can stop them, because it's like their instinct. They're like, I got to lay these eggs. I got to bury them. So I didn't touch them because they're protected. Yeah. But I could have freaking stood on the thing. I wouldn't have, but it was just like, oh my God, so powerful. But like, that's just what you were saying too, with there is such a connection with nature that they have down there, and this respect for nature. And it's just, so in that sense, there are a lot of things that we, coming from this kind of first world society, and you know, we have this power hungry greed, and we can just take over anything we want to, and there's no respect for nature anymore. I mean, I feel like there's definitely a push towards it in a lot of ways, but it's not something we appreciate enough, and we take it for granted. And it was really, really cool to see that down there. Even the buildings, I didn't sleep in a single building that had actually concealed walls. Either it didn't have walls at all, or the windows were just mesh. And so you're waking up to the howler monkeys above your bedroom at 4 o'clock in the morning, or listening to a rainstorm in the jungle. And so just, it was phenomenal. Again, that connection with nature, right? Yeah. Like when you did feel that, like, was it, because I always kind of feel like it's like, I feel like I'm remembering something that I forgot. Nostalgia, right? Yeah. Like, or deja vu. Did you feel that too? Yeah. it was definitely, there were many moments where it was my intention to go down there and kind of reconnect with my health in a lot of ways. And
sure.
I am a big proponent of natural health too. And I think that like nature is so important. Even just the fact that like the sound of birds is a natural de-stressor for us, because in the wild, if birds are chirping, it means you're safe. But if the birds stop singing, there's danger nearby. And our body, over these thousands of years that humans have existed, has just adapted to understand that. So whether or not we're conscious of it, if you hear birds, it's going to be helping your cortisol come down and
Very
whatever, you know.
So cool.
So there's so many things like that, you know, even the sound of the ocean, or just being in the sun, you know, you're getting your vitamin D and it's a happy drug. And so many things that being there, it was just like, oh yeah, this feels right.
So cool.
You know, and it was just rejuvenating and revitalizing. And,
again, I think that is what we miss out a lot. And I think we have a lot of, you know, you kind of touched on that point, that greed and that kind of where we push nature and a lot of natural things aside, like in Western culture and things like that, which is kind of sad. Like, I mean, you know, I love going to Europe and stuff, and I love that kind of culture and that stuff, but it's relatively new comparatively speaking, right? To that, you know, again, just that you're going even further back in our connections and our feelings, and you know, the sound of birds and how we brought that and we kind of turned that almost into music, which is great. And it's like, oh, awesome, you know, but it is, even though there's beautiful music, it's still like not quite the same as the original, right? It's still kind of an analog for the real thing. It's
mathematical, and not that music is mathematical in general for sure, but it's curated and it's refined and it's controlled.
Yes.
But in nature, it's not controlled. You can't control that shit.
Yeah.
It's coming back to what you were saying about the jungle overgrowing, right?
Right.
So many cool stories about that. But to your point that you made about Europe, it's interesting, and that's something I realized when I was in Costa Rica, because I love traveling, and most of my time spent traveling has been in Europe. Love Europe. I'm a sucker for history, and it's the food and the culture. I love it to death. But what I realized in Costa Rica, like I've been to like Mexico and Cuba and Dominican, but it's always been on a resort. Okay. So it's still, you're not really experiencing the culture or anything. I know what you mean. So having this opportunity to now be more immersed and out of my comfort zone, that was the main thing, where it's like, I need to do more travel like this. Going to Europe, love it, and I'll still do it, absolutely, but it's still very similar to the way we live. Oh yeah, right? For sure. You know exactly what to expect. Even if they speak a different language, you can at least figure it out. You know, they got transit systems, the phones, the currency, it's all pretty consistent, more or less. Yeah, definitely. But something like Costa Rica, it's a completely different story. And, you know, it's not as bad as it could be, but like, you can't flush toilet paper down the toilet. You have to put it in the garbage can. Okay. Simple things like that, where after 2 months, I'm like, God, I can't wait to flush my toilet paper down the toilet. Right. But like simple pleasures that you take for granted of, and it doesn't seem like much, but it does absolutely teach you some lessons and give you a few reminders for humility in that sense. I see. Yeah, I think that's a big lesson that kind of anyone can really take away. And like going down there to kind of feel that, like, that healing nature, like what was calling you to there, like what made you go there. Okay, so this goes back to the pre-build to the story. I didn't even talk about my podcast at all, did I? It's fine, we'll get to that. we'll plug it at the end. We'll get there. But okay, so May last year, I ended a very unhealthy relationship. It was, you know, I was in denial for a very long time, but I'll just say it. It was very much emotionally manipulative and abusive. And I'm so sorry. Thank you. And it's okay. I don't regret it. And he didn't do it on purpose. It was a result of deep trauma, unresolved trauma. And that's also kind of, you know, my empathy for that is also what made me stay for so long. Right. But anyways, after I left that relationship, I was at a very, very low point, because with abuse and manipulation, you end up hating yourself so much, and you blame yourself for everything, and it just breaks you down. And my mental health was in a really bad place. I was medicated for severe anxiety for a little bit. Not anymore, because I'm good. And there's nothing wrong with that either, but it was a very necessary tool to get me through that dark time. And I'm grateful I did it. Yeah. And it was just, it I mean, it was in a bad place. But so, and like I was saying to you before, that's when I went to Winnipeg for a month. My best friend lives out there, and I love Winnipeg. I've never been in the winter, so maybe I'm a little biased, but Winnipeg in the summer, really nice.
Absolutely.
And it was a beautiful month to spend out there and to be surrounded by people who love me and could give me good advice and encourage me to heal and take care of myself.
Nice.
And my best friend Natalie, she and I have traveled a lot together, and she was kind of, giving me ideas here and there. And I was also in this position where I had like a completely blank slate. So I had lived with my ex, and when I moved out, I didn't have like any furniture, was all his, all the kitchen appliances I left to him. I had my clothes and some other stuff that I sold pretty quickly on like Facebook Marketplace.
Right.
And then I had this decision where I kind of started looking at apartments for myself, but it just wasn't feeling right. And I'm like, frick, like this means I have to decide where I want to stay, because I work online. I could work from anywhere. Totally. I've got friends and family across the province, so I'm not really pulled in one direction.
Right.
And then I would have to start accumulating things again from scratch. And just the thought of that, it felt so great to just offload and be able to fit everything I own in my car.
Yeah.
And I've always been the kind of person to collect stuff too, so it wasn't like me, but I was like, oh, I have this freedom. Yeah. I got to do something about it. I work online. Yeah. I should travel. But I didn't know what that would look like.
Sure.
And then it's actually funny. I was doing, Natalie introduced me to Wim Hof breathing, which I know you've done an episode on that.
Absolutely. Yep.
I love Wim Hof, and I still do him to this day. But
tremendous.
The first time we did it, we were listening to one of his YouTube videos, and I was just lying there doing the breathing, and Wim's got such a soothing voice, and he's like, breathe in, and there's this tribal drum music playing. Cool. And I could just so clearly picture myself on a beach in Costa Rica. I've never thought about Costa Rica before, but this idea just suddenly came into my mind. And I was like, huh. And I started looking up, travel blogs and stuff of other people who have gone to Costa Rica. And a lot of people talked about volunteering at an animal sanctuary for just, a couple days here and there. And I looked into it a little bit more, and I found this one called the Jaguar Rescue Center, where you have to stay for a minimum of 1 month, and you can stay for up to 6 months. And variety of animals. So like the other sanctuaries, there was like a butterfly sanctuary I was looking at, or a turtle sanctuary. Cool. Really cool, but I wanted variety. Right. Picked the Jaguar Rescue Center. There were no jaguars. Oh no. But it's okay. It was still phenomenal. But so I applied. I sent them an email, and they responded that same day, and they're like, we have 1 spot left for the fall season for the female dorms. It's yours if you want it. I'm like, okay. This is a sign. Let's do it. Let's book it. Right. And there's like a mandatory donation involved, and it's non-refundable. So as soon as I did that, I'm like, I'm going to Costa Rica. Right. And then I built the rest of the trip around that. Okay. And so that's where that started. And then, the more I read into it, the more it's like, the Pura Vida. It's all about health and wellness. And big time. And it was just such a perfect place to go to just kind of like, and so that was June. And then I was leaving mid-October. And there was just a lot to be done between that time where I went to therapy. I had already been seeing a therapist for about a year at that point, but at this point, this is when she was like, yeah, I know, like you've been withholding and not telling me things, but I knew they were happening. You just needed to get there on your own. Sure. And so then the real healing could begin. And like, I'm a big proponent of therapy. It's a great thing. Everyone needs it. Even if you don't I've had many conversations where people were like, I'm fine. I have nothing to work on. No, every freaking person on this planet has something to work on. Absolutely. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You don't have to be sad to go to therapy. Yeah. There's just always something that you could work on to help you communicate better.
Mental fitness, right? It'll
help your relationships, whether it's romantic or friends, it's just something that will improve your life overall.
So true.
So went to therapy. You and I know each other from our personal training days. So, I've got a passion for fitness and health and wellness. So I was really diving into that, understanding how fitness, diet, and exercise has such a big player on your mental health. And, and just, intentionally making time to spend with my family, with my nieces, with my friends, because in that relationship, I isolated myself. I cut people out of my life, and, I had a lot of bridges to mend, but, so I did a lot of really good stuff. And then by the time Costa Rica rolled around, I felt like I was like, okay, I've done good work, and I feel like I'm good. There's still more work to be done, but I'm in a good place that this Costa Rica trip can kind of be like the cherry on the cake, Right. Put that stuff into practice. And it really was like just one thing to the next was phenomenal.
Wonderful. Yeah. It sounded like kind of started the ball rolling anyway in a really good way. And, it's kind of funny. People, worry about, spiraling downward, right? But you can also spiral up, right? So you have to start somewhere. And again, having that feeling of taking a breath and, you know, being able, because, you know, you mentioned you were isolating yourself. I feel like that happens too when we're struggling with something ourselves. And we know that maybe the people that we're with, because they care for us, might say something. And we don't want to be around that because we want to avoid that. We want to
absolutely. That was a huge thing. I knew that if I told any of this to my friends, they would tell me to leave right away, right? Or like, and my family was ready to have an intervention. I didn't even need to say anything. They could see it. They could see me crying every single day or constantly calling my mom in the middle of the night, you know? So, but that was absolutely part of it. You know, I wasn't ready to face that reality. And the great thing too was once I was finally through that and could come back to them, there was no remorse from them. They didn't make me feel guilty. They were just like, yeah, we're here.
Which is wonderful, and which is what 9.9 times out of 10 is going to happen, right? Hopefully anyone out there listening that's in a similar situation, it's not going to happen, but hopefully you don't have people around that are going to give you a hard time about that. That's, I think, what everyone actually expects, you know, when you're in that situation, but it's not going to happen. People around you care about you. And again, it's coming from a caring place. Even the saying, you know, even offering their opinion, you know, and that's what we're all worried about is coming from a caring place. So again, hopefully, but that goes to show you how much, again, where you start is with you, right? Because, and I feel it's sad because sometimes people can take that the wrong way. I understand, and it's happened to me too. But you got to just give people space, and you got to respect that. But I can see where people are valid when they feel, oh, I wonder if this person is mad at me. But most of the time they're not. Again, they're starting with themselves. There's something that they're so worried about, and they don't necessarily want to hear that from others too, right? So, which again, everyone has the right to live the way they want, but again, it's great that you were able to kind of see that too, obviously, and you know, start from you.
Yeah.
And getting that reset is amazing. And I think, you know, going back to nature, going back to you know, things that we've been dealing with as people for a long time, right? Like I think as humans, you know, even barring all these ancient civilizations and stuff, we were in nature, like we are nature just as much as anything else. And I think with civilization and all this stuff and putting on fancy clothes and like living in fancy houses, we've taken ourselves so far away from where we started. I don't necessarily want to go back, but again, I think it's important that if you can, and it doesn't necessarily mean go to Costa Rica, but go into nature. And you know, we're lucky you know, to be in Ontario. Even from here to Barrie, there's so many places you can go. True, and it's like you would never even realize that you're in Ontario, right?
I actually try to encourage that. I did that before I left the relationship, when it first started to get, you know, to the point where I was like, shit, I got to do something about this, but I wasn't ready yet. That I think it was February, I got myself a little Airbnb out just like east of Newmarket in the middle of farmland, and it was this really cool old converted church, and so I splurged on it. Never would have justified spending that much money on a few nights, but it was so necessary. And like, you know, I went there and there wasn't even internet, so it was perfect. I couldn't work. I couldn't be on my phone the whole time. I did a puzzle. I read a bunch of books. I walked the trails because there were so many trails all around there.
Very cool.
Went and got myself a massage, cooked myself really fun meals and healthy meals, and just, it was so good to do that. And, you know, it was an hour away, right? You don't have to go all the way to Costa Rica.
Amazing. Yeah.
And so it was, I don't know, I think we need to do time like that for ourselves more often. You know, that's a whole another conversation about work and vacation days. Don't get me started, but
Well, again, us both coming from, you know, this, for everyone listening, Heidi and I worked together at a gym in Hamilton, and again, it was the hardest job ever, essentially selling people their own health.
Yeah.
Right. It's a pre-health thing, you know, where the hospital is tertiary, you know, something happened to you and you have to be there. Yeah. Fitness was primary. It was hopefully, you know, getting ahead of the game, but humans don't really think that way, which is, so it's the hardest thing
reactive
ever
versus proactive,
big time,
right? Yeah,
which is the worst. So being like, hey, you know, pay us all this money and we're going to keep you healthy, even though you are already healthy, probably in a way. I mean, some people are coming to you already unhealthy, and then that's a bit of a different situation. But people like maintaining their fitness, that's again one of the hardest things that you can like offer someone. But again, anyone can benefit from physical fitness, and anyone can obviously benefit from mental fitness, right? In the exact same way that you can, if you're not in a place you want to be, you can get to that place. Yeah. And if you're already in a place you want to be, you can get to even a better place. And you don't know until you're doing it. Like we mentioned at the beginning, that's kind of a theme, right? Like until you're actually doing something, you don't know what you're like, you don't know what it's going to be like. And people always have, you try to think of 20 steps ahead, and it's so difficult to know. Yeah. Because anywhere along that road, one of those steps is different, the whole thing is shot. And it's usually the second or third step, and we're thinking so far ahead. Yeah. Right. And I think that's where a lot of like anxiety and a lot of that stuff, obviously that's basically what it is, right? It comes from us thinking so far.
And that's something I've had to overcome. Like I said, I was medicated for my anxiety. It was pretty severe. Now I'm like, I live in this perpetual state of bliss. And I mean, not gonna lie, I think that is largely, yes, due to psychotherapy, but also psychedelics.
Yes.
I 100% believe that psilocybin has helped to cure my anxiety. And that is
wonderful.
Something that is like scientifically being explored and documented. This isn't just me being, crazy.
Big time.
It's like I have money invested in psilocybin because I think it's going to be the next thing, right?
Good call.
And it's changed my life. I've only done it a few times, but every time I do it, it takes me to a higher level within myself. And whether I walk out of it with this insane confidence that I've never had before, or just this bliss. So like last time I did it was about 3 days ago, and it was like euphoric. It wasn't a lot of visuals this time. It was a different strain. It was really, really bright colors and stuff. But the best thing was just like, I remember lying in the grass. I laid in the grass for about 5 hours, got a really great sunburn. But I was just like, wow, I feel so powerful. And just thinking about how can I channel this power in my everyday life, because I know that this isn't just because I'm taking mushrooms. I feel this on a daily basis, and this is maybe how I come into tune with that. And I'm just like, I gotta do something with this, because there's stuff that I can do.
Right.
I'm powerful. I got this fire inside me, and I could change lives. And I know that I have, because of the last year, this journey that I've gone on. Like if I was sitting here a year ago, I would be unrecognizable. I was completely different person. And who I am now after everything that I've done, I've had so many friends tell me how much of an example I've been to them. And I'm not trying to say this to brag, but that's just like,
that's so nice.
That's the best thing. That's what you want to hear, right? After you go through something like that, to hear that you can then be an example. Someone like my little sister, she's 21, and she's, you're 21, you go through struggles. She lives in downtown Toronto. She's third-year university. Wow. She's got shit.
Sure.
But a year ago, I felt like I couldn't be a healthy example for her. She was the one giving me advice and encouraging me to leave the relationship. Right. Should be the other way around, right?
Sure.
But now I think of a year ago, and I can't believe that was real. It was a bad dream. I can't picture myself like that.
And had you ever experienced psychedelics before then? Before your first psilocybin
for mushrooms
trip?
No, that would be the first thing I did. When I was in Costa Rica, this is part of the healing journey, so I have to mention it. But at the very end of my Costa Rica trip, I went bungee jumping because it was my dad's birthday. My dad died 8 years ago. I always try to do something on his birthday. And I was like, you know what? I'm in Costa Rica on his birthday. Let's do something. So I went to the freaking highest mountain I could find and jumped. And it was, oh my God. But, and then I also, the day before that, in the same mountains, I went to a DMT ceremony with a shaman.
Wow.
And 20 other people.
Wow.
And that was a whole day. And it was holy shit.
Wow.
Like DMT is like the most powerful psychedelic out there, right?
Totally. And
I've never done it before. I was like, well, okay.
Was it 5-MeO? Was it from a frog?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was it too. It's like, this is nature. It's ability to heal. And DMT also has powers, that sounds hokey, but I mean like scientific. It's used to treat PTSD in soldiers and relationships. And like this is proven to help you.
Yeah.
I wasn't just going there to get fucked up,
Totally.
I was there to be like, okay, I've been on this journey now for 6 months at that point.
Yeah.
And I really want, I've tried every other healing modality I could find. I'm like, okay, now it's time to turn to nature.
Sure.
And I didn't want to just, find some guy in the street. It's a scary situation to be in. So I found a proper organization with a legit shaman,
wow,
a bunch of people there. I was actually like the youngest one there. Most people were over 40.
Okay.
And they were return customers. They've come,
wow,
it's changed their lives.
Okay.
They've brought their children.
That's good to hear.
It was really, really freaking cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail about the experience itself because it was pretty intimate.
Yeah,
but
sure. That's fine.
Basically I walked out of it feeling like a powerful freaking fire goddess.
Amazing.
And it was just like, holy shit.
Did you have any animal experiences in the trip?
I didn't. So at first I didn't remember.
It's more of an ayahuasca
anything.
thing, I think, is more like you see jaguars and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
So if you don't mind, did you smoke it?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So it didn't
yeah, it was about 15 minutes.
How long did it feel?
Like 30 seconds. It was honestly
really?
disappointing at first. So I was sixth to go.
That's very interesting. Okay.
Interesting experience. I was sixth to go, and I was assuming that we would have before we started like a group discussion, getting to know each other, because trust is a big thing, right?
No kidding.
But as soon as you smoke that thing, that does not matter.
Right.
But I watched 6 people go before me. 2 of them were these big, brutish Spanish guys who for sure were involved in the mob or something like that.
Interesting.
The first guy went up and he got completely naked
Hey.
and started crying and needed the shaman to hold him. And then,
Wow.
and whoa. And obviously you don't know what's going on. You can't really hear what they're saying, and they're speaking Spanish
Sure.
and whatever. The second guy who went, he screamed at the top of his lungs like a little girl, literally like a little girl, bawled his eyes out, went around hugging everyone, and then had the biggest smile on his face. And then one guy threw up. A woman went and she laid there, didn't move at all. And then she's like, oh my God, that was the most beautiful thing I ever experienced.
Wow.
Another woman went and she was rolling around on the floor and doing these things with her hands and just like, wow. Oops.
Cool. Cool.
Passionate.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, shit, I have no idea what to expect.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, I could throw up. I could pee my pants. I could take my clothes off. What's going to happen?
Right.
And none of those things happened. I smoked, and then as far as I knew, I was just lying on my back staring at the ceiling the whole time.
Sure.
And then, okay, I guess I'm going to say it. Then I was just like, okay, cool. That was fun. And then the shaman comes over me. He's like, hey, how was that? I'm like, it was pretty cool. He's like, you had an orgasm. I'm like, what? And apparently it wasn't sexual though. It was just like energy.
Wow.
And everyone there was like, holy shit, that was freaking cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't like, oh, we shouldn't look at this. Right. And I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel anything like that. I just felt like, oh, I unblocked something, from a history. I got a good amount of sexual trauma under my belt too. And I think that was a very healing thing for that.
Yeah.
And then from that point on, I just kind of felt really freaking powerful. But I don't remember seeing anything in that moment, except for about 10 days afterwards, every time you go to sleep, you can go back into DMT world.
Whoa.
Some people have full-blown trips. I did for the first night, where you can just feel it. It's like that feeling after you're on a roller coaster all day, where you lie down and you're like, whatever.
Right.
And you got kaleidoscopes and stuff. And but to this day, every so often I'll get a little spark, a little memory of something visual or a sound. Mm-hmm. I really tap into it when I do mushrooms. I'm like, oh, we're in that world again. There's a whole different language there where I'm like, I know this language, but it only exists here, and I couldn't even try to explain it if I tried to speak right now.
That's so cool.
And so there wasn't a visual element necessarily. Maybe some orange kaleidoscopy things, but I didn't see entities like some people do, or beings, or I know for some people it's a really scary experience, and it was kind of interesting to just knowing, being in that room full of people, watching them go through their experience, and you kind of would pick up snippets of what's their background a little bit, and you could kind of piece together, it's like, oh, that person has a lot of trauma, and it kind of aligns with how they were just screaming in terror, or how I just went through this healing process for the last 6 months, and I feel like I've healed my trauma. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that terror. I came to terms with it, and I could move forward, and it was building up and up from there. And that's been every psychedelic trip ever since. Wow. Ever since. I've had 3 since then.
Sure.
But still.
That's significant. It's still significant.
Yeah. So it was powerful.
No kidding. Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that, to really lean into it, I think that's actually what scares people the most about psychedelics, is it actually shows you how powerful you are and how capable you are. Because I remember after one of my biggest trips, the hardest thing I ever I had to wrestle with was, how am I going to actually come back into like normal life? Because I was like, I could go off. I think I've said this before on the podcast. I could go off and go to Tibet and become a monk right now because I'm ready. Like I'm there to just be like, I'm all mine now. Like, let's go for it. Or can I use some of this, like not use it in a selfish way, but like, can I try and teach this to people? And can I try and show that there's more to this reality?
I feel like that's kind of the point, is we're supposed to teach.
I think so too. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think but it's so hard to condense that information and in a good package. And I think that's like what art is. And I think that's what a lot of things are, is an attempt to do that, because it's hard to say it in words. I mean, even like, your trip there, but even the fact that it felt like 30 seconds, but it probably was like what?
15 minutes. Yeah.
Right. So like, and then sometimes it can be the opposite, where it's like 15 minutes, it feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, I've heard that happening.
Legitimately a lifetime. Like I heard one, and the story that I heard wasn't necessarily all that horrific. It was just like, they like snapped to and were like, I had like a wife and kids and like a full, like for months. It was right. Well, that's the other thing too. 'Cause like you touched on a point where you feel like you're in that same world, whether it's DMT or psilocybin or like, and I don't know if you've done any other stuff and any other classical
not that
psychedelics.
would get me there. No,
haven't had a lot of experience with MDMA. I haven't done DMT. I've done psilocybin. I've done like an adjunct. Acid, I guess. Have you ever tried LSD?
I haven't yet. I want to though.
But you feel like it's the same thing. Like you're somehow in there. It's a little bit more clinical, but it's not like it's this whole other thing. Like I think that's another thing that trips people out too. Is like different drugs are like whole other worlds. They're different, but you're going to like, it's just like a different car. You're in like a different vehicle, but you're going to the same destination.
And it's like every mushroom trip I've had has been completely different.
Very cool.
But there's
different
still those things.
Too?
Yes, different strains. And like the experience itself is completely different. But again, there's like, I recognize beings there now, where it's like, hey, just like out in my peripherals, you know, I'm not seeing things. And then the language or just certain sounds and just like, makes you think.
Well, that's the thing. Like, one of the biggest things I always took away was like, all it takes is you just to eat like a mushroom, and all of a sudden all this stuff is revealed. It's not necessarily that it's creating, I mean, chemically, I guess you can look in the brain. Yes, in a way it's creating those visual cues, making us see things, making us experience things. But how is that any different from what our senses are telling our brain? Because our senses aren't showing us what the whole world is. There's a lot of missing pieces. So like, why are we putting all this stock in our senses when we know actually for a fact that they're not true, and that all it takes is to eat a little piece of paper with acid on it or smoke some DMT that came from a frog, like, and all of a sudden you're in a whole other place, experiencing whole other realities or dimensions. Are they constantly existing? Right. And like, because again, even physiologically, our brain, essentially most of its job is inhibitory. Almost everything, right? Almost all processes in the brain are inhibitory. So it means that essentially we're experiencing so much more than even our brain is allowing us to do. Right. So what is that barrier? And then what is that I behind the brain? Right. Is that the soul? Is it the spirit? Who knows? There's many different theories, but again, it's like the other similarities through the worlds. What are some other ones that you've noticed? Like you said entities, but like, again, just the general feelings too, right? I
Physical
noticed
feelings, emotions, sounds that I can't replicate, but I'm like, yep, that's there. And that's from DMT world too.
Cool.
Or just, you know, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
Of course.
And you can, I mean, you know, like you literally can't explain it sometimes.
I know.
And like I did it with my boyfriend, and like the whole time we're like, we can have these conversations where there's just like these incredibly profound thoughts where it's just like unlocking things of how to be a better person. It's like, oh my God, no shit. And like, I remember at one point, he said something to me and I closed my eyes and I was like, yep. Yeah.
Cool.
I closed my eyes and I was like, yeah, they're nodding right now as if we figured it out.
Whoa.
And I was just like, yeah.
Cool.
And, you know, I don't know, but it's really cool. But I do think that Yeah, like this, there's a massive stigma around it and everything. And, you know, whether or not you're trying to figure out if it's just in your mind, I think there's such an element of arrogance in humanity and everything like that, where we need to also remember, like, frick, 10 years ago, never mind 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the things we have now would have been absolutely unbelievable.
Oh my God, sure.
And we just refuse to believe something to be true because we can't prove it. Like, oh gosh, this is getting into the whole concept of God and spirituality, right? But even that, like, you never, like, we don't know. And we have this desire for control, and, you know, because we can't prove it, it can't possibly exist. And you write something off as dangerous or ridiculous, or just, you know, for a bunch of junkies to enjoy.
Right.
But, you know, if you're also going off of science, every single thing on this planet exists for a reason. Otherwise it would be demolished by evolution, right?
Totally. And I think that's kind of the dark side of science, is that it's pretty new, right? Like, relatively every year there's some new instrument that's used for measurement that we're constantly refining, building crazy particle accelerators, like all the time there's something new happening. That's a good side of science. That's great. But a lot of times it's tough to build laws. It's tough to build things on them because they're ever changing. So a lot of the stigma and stuff that is around drugs all kind of came from, like, the war on drugs and all that stuff that kind of came from, you know, Nixon and all that stuff, and prohibition and right. So, like, that's what really created that stigma. But the scientific part, you know, has started, you know, let's just even say, like, in the 1800s, as things were really starting to move towards more of an intellectual kind of approach. I think it's still so new. We still haven't quite figured out science. As much as science is great, it isn't necessarily a counterpart to religion. Yeah. It's
we can cohabitate.
100%. I mean, again, I think they're probably two sides of the same coin in the same sense, because there's some faith that you have to give to science, right? You have to, I don't know, do you like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
I've never watched it. I've been meaning to.
Tremendous show. I think you'd like it a lot. It's a really funny show, but there's one scene where they talk about how, like, science gets things wrong sometimes. You know, for a long time, scientists actually thought that, like, the, you know, planets revolved around the Earth, and, like, let alone the actual influence from religions and things like that. But again, they take it, obviously, a funny approach to it. But again, they just talk about this whole idea that, you know, with the Bible, you're taking the word of someone who wrote something in a book that you've never met. In science, you kind of do the exact same thing with textbooks, right?
Yeah,
so
don't get me started.
It's funny, but again, it's an interesting thought in the fact that science hasn't got everything necessarily right.
Yeah.
And I think religion has been around for a long time, and it's not the entire picture. And I think if we can find a way to have them both meet, we might actually get a better. And what is that picture? I don't know, a better understanding of life potentially, or at least just an understanding that, you know, that there shouldn't be this clash, and we could get so much further, you know, working together. And I think that battle back and forth, because again, a lot of the anti-drug laws were, like, religious based, like they're Christian values and Puritan values, and, like, we can't, you know, the body's a temple and stuff like that, which is also great. But again, taking these psychedelics and stuff, they're not hurting you.
No, I think it might even be a connection to God or whatever higher powers out there.
Especially like psilocybin and mycelium.
Yeah.
Super trippy stuff there. But again, just only culture in the world are, like, Arctic cultures that have never used some type of plant
or
some,
about this.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, and it's just because things don't grow up there.
Yeah.
But again, they have, like, fermented fish and, like, do stuff like that, and they probably trip out some other way. But they probably do Wim Hof stuff. But, right?
They do in their ice.
You know what I'm saying? So, but again, that altering the consciousness is actually a significant part of, like, human culture. And, you know, people do it with alcohol and tobacco and stuff, and that's cool.
That's legal.
And it's weird, right? It's super weird that all this stuff, and yeah, maybe it's not to get too conspiracy on everybody, but maybe they don't want people like us talking like this, like saying, like, there's so much more to, like, what reality is, and don't put all your stock in what this is, because there's people out there that are like, we want you to make money, we want you to be like a citizen and like a civilian and like blah blah blah, and it's like
subordinate,
big time, right? Well, that's the thing, is that I think our Western culture is very ego based, and that's probably not it's not a big revelation, but I think the people who started, or the way our culture has started, was very ego driven, conquer new lands, right? Go to new places, all this stuff. And that has some merit in it. But when it clashed with other cultures that had already gone past that ego or done things to keep their ego in check, because that's the other thing that psychedelics does, especially in practice, is it keeps your ego in check. But as soon as that clashes with an overblown ego, it tends to like lose battles, right? Because you don't want to fight. The last thing you want to do is fight. Yeah. And which is interesting, because I feel like people are like, government or whatever, are afraid of people being like, oh, we're going to attack. But it's going to be more like, no, people are just going to realize a lot of these rules are bullshit, and we're going to stop doing them. And I guess that's probably the biggest fear, and where things really lie, as far as like, don't let people do psychedelics. But it is fascinating that we're getting to a place with science that's allowing us, right? So it's funny, the religious science, like, again, I think that they should be connected. I don't know if you've ever read Angels and Demons by Dan Brown. Tremendous. Movie's a little different, but that whole idea, like, one of the characters in it is a priest and a physicist. And like, his whole life's work was to try and bring religion and science together. And I think that's such a beautiful idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, though. So I grew up very religious. My dad was a minister. My brother is a minister. Mm-hmm. My family still goes to church. I don't go as often. Mm-hmm. We don't need to go into that. But from my experience and what I've seen, it's kind of funny how even within religion, people don't really know what they believe. And you can have people in the same friggin' church building and they can't agree on things. Because I don't know. I feel like that's where the principles of science can come in, where it's like, you assess, you have investigations, and you learn. The whole goal is learning, and it's not necessarily to prove whether or not God exists, but like, at least do research into what it is that you believe. Yeah. And that includes like theology and understanding. Certain versions of the Bible were completely manipulated by King James, for example, with his very Puritan values, or how the Catholic Church withheld the Bible, or like just even thinking about it logically, about how, it was written 2,000 years ago, and it was actually decades after the events that it was actually written down, and it was just passed on by stories at that point.
The Council of Nicaea was like 500 years after Jesus died,
right,
I think.
So how much broken telephone do you think is happening there? Plus, written by a man who has personal values. They're not perfect. They're going to apply some bias. Big time. You can clearly see that in the differences between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. One of them is actually a lot more full of himself than the others too. But it's just like, again, I'm not trying to discredit the Bible or anything like that. But just when you think about certain things like that, if you apply that logic, you can also apply that logic in other places and see how these things can make sense and actually support and back each other up. Big time. Not just live side by side, but work together. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that would just,
Well, I think that's the dark side of religion. I think the organization part is tough, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's when a lot of man comes in. Uh-oh. Sorry about that, gang. I don't know how long our video was out there, but we'll get the audio back going here. We went back and listened to where we went off, but we were just kind of saying, that's unfortunately with organized religion, things kind of get. That's where you kind of lose the real story, right? Because that's where like people's influence come in, and people's own thoughts and egos and all that stuff start to come in. And for the longest time, there was no real difference between church and state. Mm-hmm. So what was being, the laws and what was being said by God were one and the same. So I think, again, it's kind of one of those things where the golden rule is always important, treat others as you want to be treated. The teachings of the Bible, or things that you can get from it, or any organized religion, are the important things. But then when we're fighting and we're killing each other over it, like again, I was raised Catholic, and that was my biggest thing, was learning about the history of what the Catholic Church has done. Really took me away from being like, okay, I'm cool with like the moves and all that stuff. Because it's like the teaching, again, I get it. Jesus had some good things to say, and the Old Testament had some interesting things, which the Old Testament and New Testament are so different too, right? So, but again, a book written by a person who is fallible, right? It's not actually the word of God, even though that's what they told everybody. And that's again where that's what pushes things away and what makes things more esoteric, and what drives it in the other direction of science, right? Where the scientific method is kind of starts with, we might be wrong, right? Which I think is that's one of the most valuable things from science, is like, this is a theory. This is not a law, because it could be wrong. We don't know right now. This is the best we got with the information we have, right? Where, like you mentioned, that arrogance kind of thing can come from religion, where like, we know everything. Like, we don't need to learn any new stuff. Like, this is good, right? Which is limiting. So, again, I think trying to bring those two things together is important. And with all this research about psychedelics, I think we're going to get closer to that, because there's really, to a certain point, like we said, we can't really explain this with words, but at a certain point, it starts sounding like we're talking about God.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially when you're like, oh, I just love you so much, man. It just feels so beautiful.
Yep.
I don't know why we fight about anything,
Big time love. Like,
right?
I like, so I don't know if you experienced this, but one of my biggest trips, I experienced a feeling of like, the universe is composed of love. Like, that's what everything is actually made of.
Yeah.
So living in a loving way and putting that out there and loving people is adding to the universe, rather than like subtracting and taking away with more negative and egotistical feelings, where I find the ego is put in place to keep us grounded and keep us like paying our bills and like surviving like Jaguar attacks and like, stuff like that. But now that we're starting to get lucky enough, and maybe we get to a point with technology and, everyone's worried about robots and stuff taking everyone's job. But if we actually don't have to work,
It's not that bad.
it's not going to be bad, because we're going to be able to go in, and inner space is infinite, and we're going to be able to work on that and potentially move to a place of enlightenment because of that, which could be really, really special. But again, people rail against that. They rail against the unknown. They rail against those feelings.
Yeah.
But that loving aspect, again, why would there be wars? Why would there be any of that if we all like really tapped into that? And love has a spectrum, as the show says, right? But you know what I mean? Like, it's there's dark sides to love. There's good sides, but again,
it's the human side.
That's the part. And again, whatever is behind, like, what is the I when we're experiencing that, like, is always the big question too, which maybe we'll get closer with science.
And yet there's that whole concept of the ego death, right?
Big time.
And you put that away, and it's just like, it becomes over time a lot easier to separate those two and be able to, take a step back from what about me? All of this, all about me,
Right.
Unless it is that I need to take care of myself. Absolutely. I think that's a good thing, and we need to embrace that. But you learn humility, and you learn peace, and you learn not to worry about things, not to stress so much. And it's just like, if you're ever in a trip and you're just like, as long as it's a good trip, because bad trips can happen too, but even they're good trips.
Sure. Challenging trips.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you're in those moments, it's like, how could this ever be a criminalized substance or a demonized substance where there's literally only good that is coming from this right now? You also can't get addicted to it.
No
And
way.
If you're
the last thing you want to do right away is more mushrooms after you've done mushrooms. Anyway.
I know. And it's not like you're not getting a fix. You're not chasing that high. Because if you're in a bad place and you're looking for a fix like that, you're not going to go to a good place on mushrooms. So like, I don't see how that can be so horrible.
Sure.
And then, alcohol and tobacco is literal poison, and we can consume those in unlimited quantities.
I think that's where the ego comes in at the end of the day too. That's where the fear is actually is coming from the ego saying, I don't want you to do that because it's going to destroy me. But you can't really survive without the ego.
Yep.
Like, you do need it, but several times, but like my big trip, I felt my ego come in like really hard, because I had full ego dissolution, and it came back like, how dare you, like, you can't live without me. And I was like, that's the feeling that I got. And I was like, okay, man, that's harsh, I don't think that's true, but I could tell like that's what the ego is, like a feisty, like
it's self-preservation,
overprotective, like
yeah.
it's weird, and the biggest con the ego has ever pulled is making it believe that it's you. And it can be like, you're gonna hurt yourself, you're gonna do this, which sometimes is good. It's good not to fall off the cliff, it's good not to eat the poison apple, it's good not to do whatever, and that's what the ego is for. But it can become overprotective, and then that's where I think people don't even realize what's happening too, that it's running your life in that way, because that's what it does. But when you do and I think it does happen after multiple trips. I don't really think it happens after one, because like I said, and that wasn't my first trip where I felt that full, but that was my first like true ego death. And subsequent times where I felt maybe not full dissolution, or at least some separation from the ego, when it came back, it was never as harsh. It would come back, or I didn't perceive it as harsh. Like there was one time me and a bunch of my friends did it, and we were all sitting in the room and we were all coming down, and I felt it come back in the room.
Oh,
and it was like
as if
and it was like,
presence?
look at me. Like, what are you guys doing? You guys are all fucking high.
Whoa.
Look at you losers, kind of thing. And I was just sitting there, and it's obviously just happening in my experience. And I'm just sitting there, and in my head, I'm like, hey man, like, it's cool. Like, we see you.
Yeah.
It's good. Like, sit down. And it was there was a calming feel.
Whoa.
And it was really interesting, but I only knew that because I knew I didn't want to get rid of it. And I think but this is where things are really abstract. We're talking really abstract here, because it's technically a part of my psyche, but that's the weirdest thing, right? Where it can convince you of stuff that's not necessarily true. Where again, it's nice to have a therapist or like something to show you otherwise. And again, psychedelics do that for sure, and they can kind of. And it doesn't have to be a full ego death. It's more just like loosen the grip a little bit. Right? Like let go of the ego's hand for a second, or like let go. Like, cause it's more, again, it's there to protect you, but that's the thing. It can become overprotective.
Yeah. I don't think I've had one bad experience on mushrooms, but
okay.
I think it was just, I wasn't in the right place for it. I just had like a bad fight with my brother, and I was just, stressed, and I think I took a little too much on an empty stomach, and I just had a really hard time separating reality from what was in my head for a long time.
Sure.
It was okay. It was just in that moment, and I knew even when it was happening, I'm like, this is just temporary. It's fine. But it was just like a little.
Which is an important tip. Anyone who is listening who wants to get into it, if it's you or anyone that's helping you with the trip, if they can remind you that it's not going to last forever, that is very comforting. Yeah. Because a lot of people get caught up with, is this how everything's going to be? Yeah,
it was pretty freaky. But aside from that, it's been really beautiful experiences. And I absolutely have gotten to, like I was saying, a place where I can kind of have that perspective and like take that step back from my ego. But it didn't have such an aggressive approach that yours did, which I don't know. Right. Like, I mean, you can't explain why, right? Everyone's got their own things, but it's been a nice.
I was exhausted, so like mentally, so I had no, like, so long story short, we basically stayed up like all night kind of thing, just because we like worked till late, and then like drove up. Me and my buddies drove up to Algonquin, and we were like up for a long time. We fasted. So we was like exhausted, probably dehydrated, and very tired. Yeah. And I just had no mental like walls up anymore. Like there was no like. I went through. It was like at the end of like definitely my most intense trip. So like I was just like reeling, and it was a feeling that I'll remember, but it didn't like ruin the trip. It was a bad part of an overall good trip.
Yeah, and it still kind of teaches you something either way, right?
Oh my gosh! Again, this was a long time ago. I still talk about it.
Yeah.
It teaches you, and that's the other thing too, because I think people are also so used to like an alcohol culture. You do remember the stuff after. Like people think, oh, you're gonna. It just is a drug, and it happens, and you forget.
No, you don't black out. None of that.
No, I mean, sometimes there's things that maybe there's parts of things that you don't recall, or you experience things that maybe some other people have to tell you, but it's not like you're going to forget them.
Yeah, I think you remember what you're supposed to remember, and whether or not you remember it consciously too, right? It could be something that, you know, I don't know, you healed something or unblocked some kind of trauma, or your subconscious knows this. It's like an instinct now or something, but I think it's intentional. It's not just arbitrary, random pretty colors and shapes and stuff. It's like, no, this is a journey, and you'll get what you need from it, whether or not you remember or whatever, you know.
And that's why it's really interesting. I mean, you know, you've always been a really big proponent of, you know, my getting into psychedelic psychology and pursuing that. And I've always really appreciated that, because it's kind of one of those things that unless you've experienced it, it's kind of hard to like encourage someone to get into, because you just don't, it's part of almost the same idea. But having a guide there, I think, would be really, really cool, right? Like having someone bringing you through certain things, because that is, you know, talk about being tangential here. On trips, you can go all different places, you know, depending on what's surrounding you, right? If some music comes on or something happens, like your focus can be all over the place at certain moments. So it'd be really interesting to see, you know, through school and hopefully through my own experience, actually see what it would be like to have a guided session. Right?
Yeah.
Because this is how much your DMT was a little bit more guided than anything, but you know, your mushroom trips were just like, right. Yeah. So like same with me, where it's like, we're learning all this stuff from friggin' raw dogging it, let alone if someone was like holding our hand through it. So it's super interesting.
That's what I find, like, the amount that it is legal is it's in mostly in end of life care, right? So for like terminal cancer patients, it's been in Canada right now, it's a bit of a debate. Like they're taking the government to court for it and stuff because they've withheld it. But anyways, it's being used to make that terminal diagnosis more manageable, right? And so they have a doctor guiding you through it. They have a couch like this, and you lie down, and they hold your hand and make it really comfortable, put some music on, and they walk you through it. And like, I mean, you've seen Have a Good Trip, right? They talk about it there, right? Or is it? No. It was Fantastic Fungi where they talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. And they go into that science of it, and any patient they interview is just like, it's changed my life, and it's brought me so much peace. I'm at peace. I'm not afraid of dying anymore. And like, even that, I'm not friggin' afraid of dying.
I know.
I don't want to die a painful death. I don't want to die now, but I'm intrigued by the thought of dying.
Yeah. And well, I don't remember having a fear of death. I don't think I did before. I mean, being an athlete, they don't really tell you, like, they don't treat you like you're gonna die, or else you probably wouldn't play sports, right? Like, they're never like, hey, you're gonna get invincible. You're gonna have like a career-ending injury at one point. Like, you probably would never start. But as a kid, it was nothing. I mean, some kids deal with it. What am I saying? I personally just didn't really ever have that. You know, I never really dwelled on death.
Even with your Catholic upbringing.
There's more guilt there. It wasn't necessarily death.
That's fair.
And I had a lot of family members pass away even before I did my first trip. So I had experience with death too. So, but it wasn't, it was interesting. Good point. But it was more the Catholic guilt is what fucked me up. Yeah. But after that serious trip, I was like, I'm not more intrigued with what happens. Again, not like, it's not like a suicidal ideation. It's more like, I believe death is just going to be another step into another experience that I don't think it's going to be black, because if all these other realms exist and we're just not seeing them because we have to, you know, ingest some plants or do some breathing or do something to get us into that mode, is death a way to be in that mode again? And does that continuously happen? I mean, there's 13 or 12 known dimensions right now to science, let alone what else is out there.
Wild.
So like, do you just transition to another one, right? Or do you start all over again? Like, again, it's I think doing psychedelics and having experiences with that weight and magnitude is some proof of like, why would this just go black at the end? You know, like, it would be a damn shame, I think, if this shit just went black, because there's so many people that go from birth to death with never experiencing any psychedelics. And that's a shame. And that's something that has come from the government, but that's also, again, a thing of we need, as a culture, to get a hold of our egos. And I think that comes from, you know, self-care and going to therapy and experiencing new things that you've never experienced, whether it's through travel or psychedelics, or again, just putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, because, you know, you put yourself in a situation where, you know, you're in a whole new country. They're like without any plans. You had the first 2 nights, boom.
Yeah.
But everything else, you know, and it gives you that chance to kind of like wipe the slate clean in a sense. And that doesn't mean destroying who you are. That's just saying
Rebuilding.
From now on, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Right. Or, you know, like I've said it before on the show, like it's like a ski hill. At the end of the day, there's all these runs, and when you go down it, you kind of fall into certain grooves and you feel like that. That's kind of how your psyche is. And doing psychedelics is like an avalanche comes down, and it's just fresh.
Well, that literally is how trauma pathways work, right? And that's how psychedelics can help heal trauma pathways.
Big time.
It's exactly like a perfect description of it.
Right?
Like
I think it's beautiful too. It's that feeling of once everything's nice and fresh, yeah, you can go back into your old ways, or, you know, something like it, or you can go somewhere completely new.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful. And again, I think that's our way that we're going to kind of move forward as a culture and hopefully get to a better place.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Like, it would just make everything so much better. And just like, even just the connection between all the beautiful things we enjoy on a daily basis as it is, like music. Half the music we listen to wouldn't exist if it weren't for psychedelics.
Big time.
You know?
That's what Bill Hicks always says. He's like, if you guys don't like drugs, take all your albums and burn them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because everyone was on drugs.
And it's brilliant, and it's fine.
Yeah. That's the thing, you know, again, that whole idea of altering your consciousness is not, again, like I talk about guilt. That's a big thing. It's like, you should feel bad about doing that. You're a druggie. This is bad. This is only degenerates do stuff like this. It's like, we need to get away from that. And I think, again, hopefully with all this research and new stuff, is your sister at U of T?
Ryerson
or Metro.
Toronto Met. She actually had a place in renaming it, which is pretty cool.
Oh, cool. Tremendous. Right on. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I know U of T has a psychedelics program, but again, I feel like more and more universities are going to start to adopt it, and it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be so cool. I know Ottawa has one, and I was looking into it. I'm like, I don't qualify for this program, but that would be so cool.
Yeah. It's great to hear. I didn't know Ottawa had it. Again, this is the thing. I think more places are starting to get it. And again, hopefully more people get into it, and hopefully we can heal the world.
Hope so. I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to finish it off. I wish we could talk forever. We're going to have you on again, hopefully.
Hell yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Anything you want to plug? People, where can people find you? Where can people watch your podcast?
Oh, well, there's nothing to watch. There's only, you can listen on Spotify. It's called All Who Seek Happiness. Cool. It's only a couple episodes. I'm due to record another one soon.
Check it out.
These days. But yeah, it's okay. Let me explain a little bit about this.
Absolutely.
So like, it's called All Who Seek Happiness, and the whole concept of it is kind of documenting the journey of finding fulfillment through wellness in all ways. So that's kind of like a good little umbrella for what we were just talking about. Wonderful. You know, through fitness and nutrition and psychedelics and therapy, all of those things, and just kind of, you know, essentially having conversations like this. And I'm hoping to turn it into something a little bit more. But yeah, so there's that. Otherwise, just, I don't know, Heidi Hoffman on Instagram.
At Heidi Hoffman. And at All Who Seek Happiness. Is that the tag? Well, I'll put it all in the description there where you can find Heidi. Thank you again so much for coming on. Can't wait to have you on again. Again, go check out Heidi and everything she does. Go support her. Again, thank you for sharing everything. That was super brave. And again, I think it's important for people to hear this kind of stuff, right? Because absolutely. You know, everyone has a kind of idea of people who want to improve themselves in a certain way. And if you're going down that psychedelic road, everyone thinks, oh, hippies, and like, you know, it's complete other world. And maybe we are hippies, but again, that's the thing. It's accessible. You don't have, you know, don't let your ego hold you back.
Hell yeah.
Right on.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heidi. Thanks everyone for listening too. Again, if you like the podcast, please give us a 5-star review wherever you're listening, or whatever star you like, but if it's 5, that's better. Like and subscribe to our video on YouTube. Hit that bell for notifications so you know when our new videos drop. If you want to donate to the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. And please share with your friends. If you tell one friend, we can double the podcast overnight. Check us out. We'll see you soon. Peace.
Bye.